I heard in an audible voice, Jesus' voice, and this is 20 years later, he said, I want you to tell the whole story now. Hold nothing back. The world is ready, and so are you. I think it's probably important to let people know just how sick I was. I actually had my appendix ruptured. I had E. coli in my system, and I was on my way out. I didn't realize it was that bad. I just thought I had the flu. So I go into the hospital, and they check me out. They're poking around on my abdomen, and the nurse says, hey, I think this is probably your appendix. Did you do any physical activity lately, any unusual physical activity? And I had played baseball in the park with my kids on Wednesday, and this is Saturday night. And she kind of looked at me like, wow, okay, if your appendix ruptured on Wednesday, we got to get you back there fast in the surgery room. They wheel me into surgery, and they slide me over onto the surgical table from the gurney. And before any mask was put on my face or any medication was given to me in my IV, I look to my right, and Jesus walks through the surgical doors. And he's wearing a white robe. He's darker complexion than I had ever seen. He had these bluish green eyes, more green than blue, short beard, and wearing a white robe. And he walks up to me laying on the surgical table, and he says, I want to answer your prayer. And he holds out his hand. And I'm thinking, man, what's going on here? I honestly thought, did I die? Because Jesus is here, he's taking me to heaven. Is this how it happens? So I took his hand, and right when I did, we were both standing on this hill. Everything around me is white, like as white as white can be. It's just blinding white. But I look down at my feet, and I'm still wearing a hospital gown. I can see that. I can see my bare feet standing on this grass, and the grass is just perfect. It's deep, dark green. And my senses were heightened to the point where I could count every single blade of grass touching my feet. I knew exactly how many blades of grass there were. It was amazing. And so as I'm looking around, all of a sudden there's this white, like a circular object that appears. It looks like a basketball size kind of a sphere. It's whiter than the rest of all the white. Everything around me is still bright white. But this circle is kind of shimmering, and it's like a different white, but it's still blinding. And all of a sudden it sends off these fluorescent light tubes. They're coming from this circular white light. And I'm just like, what the heck is this? And they kind of zip by my head. One of them comes by, and it hits me right in the forehead. And as it goes through me, it warmed me like right down to my toes. And it just made me feel secure, warm, loved. It was really weird. And then as I look back at where these things are coming from, that basketball shape, that white light, it's like all the rest of the white that's in front of me now. Everything was white. It's like that was a curtain, and somebody pulled the curtain from my right to my left. And so now this white goes away, and now I'm looking at this beautiful scenery of I am standing on a mountain. Below my feet, down at the bottom of the mountain, are these beautiful little flowers. They're all pastel colors, and they're kind of bending in the wind, but there's no wind. It's almost like they were dancing. At the bottom of that, there's a city. There's a huge city, miles across. But all I can see is the tops of the buildings, because that white light, or the veil, or whatever it was, is now settled in that valley over the city. It's like fog. So it's covering everything except the tops of the roofs are sticking through. And in the middle, or towards the middle of this giant city, there's a great big golden dome. There's a couple other smaller domes that are gold that are sticking through. But most of the buildings that I saw were almost like church steeples, but they were white. They were bright white, sticking through that white fog. And one of the things that I noticed was no crosses at the top. All the steeples here have crosses on the top. Almost all of them. but they didn't have crosses. I thought that was a little strange. And then on the other side of this city is another mountain it's huge, and it's taller than the one I'm standing on, and it's covered in all these beautiful pine trees, and they have these lacy needles on them. They're just beautiful. Oh, and then above that is the sky, but it's like the most beautiful sunset I'd ever seen with the colors, but there's no sun. It's just a beautiful, colorful sunset, and but the colors I can't even describe. I mean, we only have so many words to describe what colors look like. It was beautiful. It was amazing. It was bright and vivid. At the bottom was red and oranges and yellows, and then it gives way to greens and blues. And the blue at the very top was the most beautiful blue I've ever seen. And then those light beams, the one that hit me in the head, are now going over the valley. And one of them hits the tip of one of the pine trees, and it bursts into like hundreds of tiny little light beams, and it's just like fireworks, like boom, and they just fill up the sky. And pretty soon more of them hit the tips of the trees that appeared to have diamonds on them, and there's just like these white fireworks going off everywhere. And I'm looking at this, and the white fireworks with the background of that vivid colored sky, it was just amazing. And I look back at where they were coming from, and Jesus says to me, "It's the glory of the Lord." And when he said that, I was just overcome with emotion. My knees got weak, and I fell to the ground. I was unable to stand. When my knees hit the ground, at that exact moment, he shocked me, and they brought me back. And so now, instead of this beautiful scenery, I've got a doctor leaning over me with a mask on. And he says, "Do you know your name?" And it took me a little bit to get the words out because my mouth was so dry. And now I'm hot and sweaty again, back in my body. And I said, "Mike." And he says, "Good. Do you know where you are?" And the city we were at is Ventura, California, on the west coast of the United States. And he says, "Okay." So I said, "Ventura." And he says, "Okay." He's back, and he's talking to people in the room. Now I realize that there was like 5 or 6 other nurses in the room, all wearing blue scrubs. And he says, "Let's get them up to ICU." And so I spent 4 days in ICU and 12 days in the hospital. When I got home from the hospital, I had a few of my friends come over. These are 45, 50-year-old men. They sit down on the couch with me, and I start telling them about this near-death experience. And I get through that part, and I'm crying as I'm telling this thing. I still get emotional when I tell it. So I tell them this, and they're crying right along with me, holding my hand. And I get to the second part, which is so crazy that it made me sound like I was nuts, like I had brain damage from this thing, because I told them, yeah, and 24 hours later, Jesus came back into my hospital room, and I had a 3-hour conversation with him. And every single one of the people that I told, like 6 or 7 of them, every single one, their expression went from, "Wow, this is the most amazing thing," as they're crying. And then all of a sudden they look at me like, "You're crazy. Like, this is too nuts. I can't believe this." And so after about the 6th one, I heard Jesus whisper in my ear, the same voice that I had heard Jesus the week before. He says, "You don't have to tell this part yet." And I thought, okay, good, because they think I'm crazy. I'm going to lose my job. So I just shut up about that. So 20 years later, I started telling the story, the first part of the story, and it kind of caught on, online. And I would read all the comments. And I read this one comment that said, "It was just a hallucination brought on by your high temperature." And I thought, okay, that doesn't make sense, because the next day when Jesus showed up and I had the conversation with him, the nurse came into the room and took my temperature after they had packed me in ice because I was coming down with pneumonia. She took my temperature, and it was only 100 degrees, which is not enough to cause a hallucination. So I knew that wasn't right. And right when I read that certain comment, I heard in an audible voice, Jesus' voice, same voice, and this is 20 years later, he said, "I want you to tell the whole story now. Hold nothing back. The world is ready, and so are you." The second part happened 24 hours later. I had this beautiful near-death experience, and the next day I woke up at 2 o'clock in the morning. I was flat on my back in the hospital, and I woke up at 2 o'clock and I couldn't breathe. I was having a really hard time breathing. It was like there was water vapor in my lungs, and I was really struggling to get a breath. And so I hit the call button and I called the nurse. She comes in, she puts a stethoscope on my chest, and she listens and she says, "Oh, honey, you're developing pneumonia." And my first thought was, I'm going to die. That's why Jesus showed me heaven, because I'm just too weak. I mean, I was so weak I couldn't pick my hands up off my chest. That's how weak I was. And I thought that's why that happened. And so they came in, they packed me in ice, they gave me oxygen, they gave me this little spirometer to breathe into to work my lungs and try and clear the pneumonia. And I was really scared. And so as these other nurses are leaving, I feel this holy presence enter my hospital room. And I just knew that Jesus was there. Now, this time I couldn't see him, but he sat down at the end of my bed. The first thing he said was, "I had to get you flat on your back, away from all the distractions, so you could hear me." And I thought, distractions? And so I could hear you. Man, what's going on here? Again, I was confused. And he started telling me things that were going to happen in my life. He said, you've got some valleys to go through. So whenever something bad happened after that, I thought, oh, that's what Jesus is talking about. But he said, I've approved it, and you don't have our perspective. You have a worldly perspective, so you won't understand all of it. But it's for the good of the kingdom. One of the first things he told me after he said, I got you flat on your back, he said, our story is going to be heard by millions. And I laughed. I said, I'm not Billy Graham. I'm not going to do this. I was not comfortable talking to, 5 people at a time, But during that 20 years, when I started thinking, okay, he said, you are ready. He kept putting me in front of more and more people as I was, first I was coaching baseball, and then I started a football league in my little town for all these kids, and I would speak in front of hundreds of people, and I got comfortable doing it. After that happened, I started going to church more and more regularly, and I just thought, okay, if he wants me to tell the story, I'm going to do it. And now I'm all in. I consider myself a follower of Christ and a disciple.
Amazing. Me too. I'm looking forward to delving into more of the details. One thing that really struck me there was how clearly you could remember that whole NDE. Is it still as clear now as it was back then?
It happened in 2004. So it's kind of funny. Like the NDE part, I remember everything. The next day after the pneumonia part, I was still pretty weak. I couldn't really pick my hands up as I gained strength. I asked my wife to bring in a notebook, and a pencil. So I started writing down all the details. So I wanted to remember it all, because I thought, okay, I told Jesus that I'd tell our story. I don't know what this is going to look like. I didn't know if I was supposed to write a book or what. I've read that notebook many times, but I don't need to read the NDE part. That part, I remember every detail, and if I close my eyes, I can still see it and smell it and feel it, and feel the love that I felt from Jesus that day.
You've essentially had this amazing experience that millions, billions of people would love to have. Are you able even to put into words what it's like literally looking into the eyes of Jesus and touching his hand?
It's really hard. Yeah. I mean, we only have, it's like me trying to describe the colors in heaven. It's the same thing. It's really hard to describe, because you can't understand the love that you feel. When he walked in, it was like he was the brother that I never had, or the perfect father. I mean, he was just perfect in every way.
So with the NDE, you literally saw him as a physical person, but then the next day in your hospital room, you didn't physically see him. How did you know he was there, and exactly where he was, and what part of your senses made you realize that he was finally with you again?
I can't even describe how I knew. but I could picture him sitting at the end of my bed, almost next to the nurse because she was there the whole time. And when I would speak, she couldn't hear me. When he would speak, in fact, the first time he said something, I asked her, "Did you hear that?" And she says, "No." And then she said, "You better breathe into your spirometer again. Keep the lungs, keep blowing to get the lungs clear." Um, I just knew he was there, and the voice was the same voice that said, "It's the glory of the Lord." It's the same voice that I heard, when he took me to heaven. So I knew he was there. It was the same feeling of love, but the holy presence thing too. I remember when my grandmother passed away. She died at home. She'd been suffering from cancer for a long time. My grandfather was a nurse. They came over here from Holland when my mom was 16 years old, and mom was in the room with her mother when she died, and she used to always tell me that when her mother took her last breath, something holy entered the room, a holy presence. And he used to always press her on that and say, "What do you mean? What are you talking about? Describe that to me." And she says, "I can't. It's a holy presence." And that kind of stuck with me. When it happened to me, I was like, "Oh, that's what mom was talking about." You just know. Um, and at the end of my bed on the wall, there was a clock and it said 2 o'clock. And that's when I called for the nurse. And I had this conversation, and a lot of the conversation was, "Is this really happening? Jesus, are you real? Are you really here?" And as he's talking to me, I kept looking at the clock, and 5 o'clock was when I felt that holy presence leave. When he was done telling me all these things that I was going to do, it was over. And 5 o'clock, they checked me. My temperature was almost normal, and they took the oxygen off, and I went back to sleep. And the book did really well. It sold all over the world. Um, and then after the book kind of died down, I thought, okay, we're done with the story. That was fun. It was a fun time. Hopefully, God's happy with me. And then 12 years after that, so this is now about 2023. The publication Guideposts, they're big here. It's a Christian publication company, and they put out these little books. They put out a series of books called Witnessing Heaven. And one day I get an email from the lady that runs the Guidepost company. And she says, "We heard about your near death experience. We're doing a series of books. And we'd like to have you tell your story to one of our writers. And, if you're interested, we can put it in this book." And I said, "Yeah, sure." So here it is, almost 20 years after the NDE, and somebody contacts me. And so that's when I started doing some podcasts, and that's when I got to read the comments and all that. It's just a really popular story. People identify with it. But to wait 20 years, it's just the story that God will just not let die. So there's more. And when he said our story is going to be heard by millions, and I told him he was crazy, he just laughed. And I thought, wow, that actually happened. I mean, millions of people have heard this story, and all around the world. I mean, I'm talking to you in Scotland. I'm in the United States. I've talked to people in Ireland and Spain and Italy and South Africa, Brazil. I mean, it's crazy. So he was right.
And tell me when you decided for certain you were going to really delve into this second part and be completely open about everything that happened.
Yeah. So the second part, I had not. I mean, this story took off without telling the second part. And when I heard Jesus tell me, "Now's the time to tell the whole story, hold nothing back. The world is ready, and so are you." That's when I started writing the new book. And I thought, okay, I'm gonna fulfill the promise that I made. He's telling me, tell the whole story. So I thought, well, okay, I'm gonna do it. And if people call me crazy, I've got all the answers. I'm not crazy. I mean, my wife may argue that I had a little brain damage, but I'm not crazy.
So another quote from the book is, "You will have heartaches and valleys. Keep talking to me and walking through them." What was your reaction when you heard that from him?
It kind of scared me, because when he's saying valleys, I had no idea what he was talking about. It worried me, but he said, "Just lean on me, and I'll give you strength." And when things would happen to me, like one of the first really bad things that happened was my father passed away, and yeah, suddenly, and he was not old; he was a pretty young guy. I just thought, okay, this is one of those valleys. I got no choice but just walk through it, and I really felt like God was giving me strength to get through that. My marriage ended after 2 years after that, which was tragic. I mean, looking back on it, it happened for a reason, and I'm in a much better place now. But it was really tough on my family. I had 4 kids, and that's divorce is hard on kids. You just never know what kind of impact that's going to have on them. But praise God, they're all followers of Jesus, and I think He helped them through that too. So yeah, definitely lean on Jesus, no matter what you're going through. And just know, the other weird part was, to me, was He said, I've approved it, like it's okay. Nothing bad happens in this world without Jesus saying, okay, it go ahead and do it. But He does use everything for the good of His kingdom. I mean, I don't know if I would have ever written my first book. I don't know if I would be in this position if I was still in that marriage. I don't know, but He knows. So he put me on the path, and at the end of the day, I'm a lot closer to Jesus than I was. And that's a good goal for anybody.
One thing I loved in the book as well is you mentioned that you heard the voice several times since years later. And there's a really good story where you actually heard it in church, and there was almost like a nudge regarding money, someone struggling with finances. Can you tell me about that story?
I was in church one day, and one of the pastor's family walked in and sat down in front of us. He had 4 little kids, and one of the little girls turns around and waves. It's a really cute family. And I heard the voice of Jesus say, "Help them." And I was like, "What?" And I heard it again, "Help them." And I said, "What am I supposed to do? How do I help them?" And I just had this feeling like I'm supposed to give them money. I mean, that was kind of my answer to everything back then. Let's just throw some money at the problem, and that'll fix it. So I thought, well, okay, we've got a church picnic to go to later this afternoon. It was one of the holidays here, and my mother-in-law at the time lived by herself, and so we thought we'll pick her up and take her to the picnic with us and give her a little social time. So we pick her up, and on the way to the picnic, I stopped at one of the drugstores, and I used an ATM at the front of the store, and I thought, God, I don't even know how much money I'm supposed to give them. I've been praying about this since I heard the voice, and I've heard nothing. And I thought, okay, so the screen pops up, and the most I could get was $200. So I hit that. I get the $200. I put it in the card. And as I'm walking out to the car, my wife had told her mom about God told me to give them some money. And she pulls out a $20 bill out of her pocket, and as I sit down and I'm writing in the card, she holds out $20 and she says, "Here, I want to help." And I said, "No, this is between me and God. If God wants you to give me your $20, I'm sure He'll tell you." And she says, "Well, how do you know He didn't?" So I said, okay, I'd rather give a nice round amount, $200, but I'll take the 220. It's a weird amount, but I stuffed it in the envelope. I sealed it up. I gave it to, now the pastor he was a youth pastor at the time. So later that night, my phone rings and he calls me and he says, "Mike, it's Pastor." I said, "Yeah." And he says, he's crying. And he says, "You're not going to believe this. My wife was driving around with the kids in the family van, and one of the tires was going flat. She pulls into this tire shop by our house. He looks at the tires and he says, "Okay, I can fix this one for you, but you need 4 new tires on this van." He says, "I've got some used tires that I can throw on there." And she says, "Well, just give me an estimate for now. I'll talk to my husband tonight." So she gets the estimate, and now back to the phone call. He says, "Mike, do you know how much that estimate was?" I said, "No." And he says, "It's $220. And he's just blown away by that extra 20 If I would have given him 200, it wasn't enough. I'm sure it would have been fine, but it wouldn't be $220. And he says, so we're going to go get the tires tomorrow. And then what makes this story even weirder was about, I don't know, a week later or so, I get a card in the mail, and it's got a bunch of cash in it, a bunch of money. And I had painted a house for a friend of mine, and I told him, you just buy the materials, I'll give you the labor, no big deal. I was a painting contractor at one time, so I did it real quick. It was pretty easy, but it was a new house, so there was a lot to do. But I got it done in a couple of weekends, and he was appreciative. So he sends me a check, sends me cash, $2,200. So now I had already tithed 10% of that $2,200 that I hadn't even gotten yet by giving it to the pastor, and that filled that need. I mean, I was blown away by, how all those numbers connected. It was pretty wild. I have more patience now with people, and when I meet somebody that calls me crazy, instead of getting mad at them, I just figure, okay, I'm just going to pray for you, that God reveals himself to you, and that you come to know the truth. The other thing is, I have a great appreciation now for the beauty of his creation. Like when, nothing's going to compare to that sunset that I saw in heaven, but there are a lot of sunsets that come pretty darn close. And, I'll walk through a park and I'll smell a flower, and somebody may think I'm a crazy person for stopping and smelling the flowers, and it's a cliche, stop and smell the roses, but I do. I came up with a funny saying that describes that. I think death is like moving. I'm not looking forward to the process, but I am very excited about the destination.